you by India is a Social Foundation. I'm your host, Pooja Grover Bhatnagar. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Mr. Pratik Kumar. Mr. Pratik has over 35 years of experience spanning the government sector, social sector, public sector, as well as the United Nations. Mr. Pratik is the country director of Malaria No More India. He is also the founder of Sashakt Foundation. Concurrently, he is also working as the president of Prayatna NGO. Welcome to the show, sir. You've had a very interesting career, transitioning from doing bachelor's in technology from IIT Delhi to moving to the civils, then working with the government and the United Nations. Tell us a little bit about your career journey so far.
So, thank you for inviting me on the show. It's a pleasure to be here. Uh, I think I was born and brought up in a time when things were very uncertain, and so people would normally choose vocations that were very sound and safe, and nobody had the kind of variety that we have today. So either you became an engineer or a doctor if you're good for something. So that's what I ended up doing. So after my schooling, I ended up as an engineer, studying engineering in IIT Delhi, and I'm from Bihar. So one of the things that you end up doing as a Bihari is that you have to take the civils. It's almost like a mandate that you have to follow, and there's a lot of pressure from the system and internally as well that you have to get into the civil services. So that was again something that we eventually got into. And in between, I was a techie where I was designing ICs and using some of my electrical engineering that I learned. But that was a kind of a transient stage of my life. So the government was my longish, the longest I would say, space that time that I spent, which was almost like 15 years. And then I moved on to the UN and then to my social sector journey. So I really don't have an answer as to why I did what I did, because if I had known that in my 50s I would be doing this, probably I would have just plunged into that, and I really didn't know this would be my calling. But at the same time, I guess all these experiences really come together and help you become who you are today. So I think my engineering degree helps me just think better, analyze better, and be different from a lot of other social sector players. So maybe I'm more linear, methodical, systematic. So I'm a process person and things like that. So those things definitely add value. Knowing the government also gives you a sense of what is possible, what is not possible. So we all tend to be very critical of the government most of the times. But when you are an insider, you realize that these are the limitations of what the government can do, and you try and work around it rather than keep complaining about it. So all this has come together very nicely, and I really don't have an answer as to why I did what I did whenever I did.
So it was how life took you, and you took up the challenges that came along the way.
Correct.
And that's a beautiful way to approach your career, and especially given the fact how wonderful an impact you're creating today basis your amazing background and work experience. So we would like to learn from you in how different it is working with the social sector, given your immense experience with the government or the United Nations, and what are the key learnings that you would bring to the social sector, basis your academic and professional background?
So one of the things that I would like to emphasize immediately is that these are two different worlds. Although in in an ideal state, government, civil society, social challenges should come together as if it's all like one singular piece, because we are supposedly be working for the same cause, and we actually are. But the nature of the beast itself is like how systems operate, how government operates versus how I operate as an independent NGO president are very different. So, in fact, that is one of the reasons why I even left the bureaucracy. There was a lot of constraints when it comes to just following systems and processes, and not so much when it came to just putting your thoughts out there and doing what you could. So as we normally, the jargon goes that the bureaucracy takes over, the system takes over. So things get just caught up in the red tape and the processes, and a lot of time initiative is not something that the government looks at kindly. You have a lot of people who will just ask you that, oh, what's your interest in that? What's your vested interest in that? Rather than, people appreciating you for having that out of the box thinking and, risk taking ability and so on. Those are the things that even the UN system is very, very bureaucratic. In fact, I personally feel it's more bureaucratic than even the government of India.
Okay.
So, yeah, because, the UN is, in a manner, another bureaucracy. If you go deep into the system, it's another bureaucracy. And of course, there are, just perks to be in the UN. It does a lot of good work, just the way government does a lot of good work. I'm not for one saying that it does not. But just then, if you are a person who is slightly entrepreneurial, wants to go out there and do stuff differently, and put your experience to good use. And I think if you want results a little quicker,
right,
and want to see and touch and feel the difference you've made, those are not the places for you to be in.
Okay.
You would rather be close to action, close to the people that you serve. Otherwise you are definitely far removed, hiding behind your files and systems and processes. So yes, you do take important decisions.
Right.
Yes, you make life-changing, give life-changing inputs into the whole process, and you can definitely change everything around you. No doubt about that. But maybe I was the type who wanted to, enjoy the touch and feel a little more rather than, just sitting behind a chair and watching it from a distance.
Right. So what we understand is that all of these organizations have a very different approach to addressing a similar set of problems, and each has its own value and place in the system. And one such organization is Prayatna, which is working on providing education, livelihood, working on sustainability, disaster management, and so much more. So we would love to know a little bit more about Prayatna's work.
So Prayatna was started in North Bihar in this city called Muzaffarpur in 2003. So I'm not a founder of Prayatna. I happened to inherit it, and it was being it was started by a bunch of my relatives. And as I said, I am from Bihar, so there is a lot of association I have there. So people familiar with North Bihar would appreciate that that area is very, very flood prone. So it's an annual affair. So when you have rains, you have these large tracts of land which, thanks to Ganga and its tributaries, just go underwater for months together. And it was that suffering that people were enduring year on year, and of course, there's a lot that is being done, but the suffering is still quite enormous. And that's something that inspired Mr. Pratik Kumar, who's the founder of Prayatna, to start something like this. Prabhatji himself is a Gandhian, so he's a follower of Mr. Subbarao, who's no more now, and he's like a practicing Gandhian. So one of the things that he also found missing in the current discourse was that while Gandhiji is the father of the nation, how many of us are really practicing anything to do with Gandhiji, really in our real lives and actual lives? And that's something that he felt that it's not the fault of the younger generation. It is about the onus on us, that how much are we able to inform the younger ones that this was Gandhiji, this is what he did, this is how he did what he did to India, apart from the fact that he got his independence, and he had certain personal and personality traits and thoughts that could move heaven and earth, and which he did. But then how do we keep inspiring the younger generation, which today is kind of having a very different pursuit? And I'll be honest in saying that a lot of people are actually rejecting Gandhian values. It is seen as too archaic and not so hip, if I can put it that way. So how do we kind of contextualize it and inform young people that no, there is merit in it, there is a lot of wisdom in it, and if you can get into it and practice it, it is your life that is going to be enriched. So these are some of the tenets. You had this flood situation, and we had this Gandhian philosophy thing that together inspired Mr. Prabhat and some like-minded friends to established Prayatna, which is what happened in 2003. Since then, we evolved into doing a whole bunch of stuff around education and then health and then livelihoods and sustainable development. Of course, youth development is an important part, and emergency relief. But these programs have evolved over the years, as you can imagine.
Okay. So speaking of emergency relief, we're just curious, given your experience, if you could throw some light on how do you prioritize, providing aid, and how do you manage the system? How do you find your partners and collaborators? Because most of the times we see that NGOs are probably headquartered in, a major metro city, and then disaster hits, say, Orissa or say in Turkey. In such cases, what is the mechanism to provide aid in the chaos, and what is the mechanism for prioritization of what kind of aid to provide?
Pooja, this question is, I think, meant for very large organizations that do international aid. I can, definitely talk from the perspective of a small player that does local disaster relief management. And of course, thanks to COVID, we did do pan India stuff, so I can talk about that as well. But so far we've not been lucky enough to look at Turkey and others, and that's a different scale. But I get your question, and it's well appreciated. So the first thing that I would mention is that you need to be very rooted in the situation, the crisis situation that itself is the challenge right now. So for example, in the flood prone areas of North Bihar, it's a seasonal thing. We know that June, July, August, and things are going to go bad. And so one, of course, is to have the ability to understand that, okay, what are the challenges that are going to come up? And a lot of them are typically routine. We know it's like cyclical. So of course, there would be some dam that would be opened in Nepal, and things would go wrong, or some heavy downpour. And now, thanks to climate change, the extremities are like too much. So sometimes there's absolutely no rain, and then you have so much rain that it just goes, enormously bad. So one is to understand what the challenge is going to be, and then to plan for it. So again, unfortunately for smaller NGOs which do not have deep coffers, we do not store stuff. Where we know that okay, there will be relief material required. But because we do not have deep pockets and we do not have kind of warehouses, we are ourselves kind of just ready to procure whenever that disaster hits. Okay. We don't store. We can't store. We can't afford rents. We can't afford to just stockpile stuff because there is no money for it. Also because a lot of the fund flows that come in happens only after the disaster strikes. People are not giving you for preempting the disaster or planning for the disaster unless you're a big NGO. So that's always a challenge. There's not much of pre-planning that you can do. During the disaster thing itself, there is a lot of legwork that has to be done, for which you need volunteers and large force and coordination and logistics and management and trying to take care that things are not siphoned off, pilferage and so on, because it's a chaotic situation. Right. And in chaos anything can go wrong, and you can get possibly a bad name as well around that. So those are the things where over the years we have done better. But I think I'll like to go to the second part of your question, which is how do you deploy this remotely? So in case of COVID, we had a 7-state presence. Okay. So we were doing 4 distinct things during COVID. So first wave, if you remember, everybody was locked inside. So we started providing cooked food because a lot of people, especially in Delhi and cities, villages you could still move around and it was a little more relaxed. But in cities it was a complete lockdown, and daily wage workers and people who were just living off everyday earnings, they just did not have anything to eat. So in that way we set up kitchens, and across Delhi we set up about 11 kitchens. Now this was done again through innovation. So some of the kitchens were run by me directly, some of them were run by partner organizations. A lot of restaurants which were shut down but had spare capacity in terms of just utensils and gas stoves and whatever, they started running kitchens for us, and there was a economic arrangement. We would pay for the the consumables and so on. So we had about 11 of them in Delhi itself. And similarly in Patna, in Gaya, in Ranchi, in Bhubaneswar, in many other places, in UP and so on, we found partner organizations and restaurants who would run kitchens for us. And we were distributing, at our peak, we were distributing upwards of 50,000 meals a day.
Okay, that's impressive work.
It is impressive. Of course, there were others that were doing much, much more. The phase one was a crisis. And
every contribution counts, yes.
absolutely. And phase one was a crisis of a different proportion because, there was nothing to eat.
Right.
In phase two of the wave, we changed our tactics to provide dry rations because people were not locked then as much. So if you could, and people were a little better prepared, they knew that, the lockdown is about to come. So that was the phase when we started distributing a lot of ration kits, dry ration kits, because managing kitchens is also a pain, distributing is also a pain. So just to give you simple examples in Delhi, because of just lack of awareness between law enforcement as well, a lot of our volunteers would get beaten up during the first phase. E-rickshaws that was transporting our food would just, somebody would just puncture it because no travelers allowed. So Delhi, Noida borders were sealed. So a lot of chaos and special permissions for everything.
A lot more coordination, a lot more costs also.
Yes, and then we realized that this is not sustainable. So when the second wave happened, we said that let's do dry rations. People who were prepared, they knew they had stoves at home, and they were prepared to cook at home. So we started making these combination packets where everything from rice, dal, atta, tail, and all the essentials were there. So we had about 10 kilo packs, and we would have distributed anything like 400 tons of grains. So my office became a warehouse, and this was something that we managed to do everywhere then. So you talk to a bunch of kirana shops, the big ones, and tell them that okay, pack 1,000 kits for us, and this would be the ingredients within that, and that's a simple thing to do. Yeah. So that was one. The third thing that we were doing would be medical supplies, so consumables, so masks and things like that, gloves and so on. And finally, we did was medical equipment, so ventilators and oximeters and so on. So there was a whole range of. And these were done in government hospitals. So across Jharkhand, Bihar, UP and Uttarakhand, we supplied to government hospitals at scale. So, and all these were like, the government hospitals that was designated at COVID centers. Right. So we got that list from the National Health, the state National Health Mission directorates. They would tell us which hospital to go to, and we had a kind of a checklist of what equipments go in there. So yes, it was a major logistic exercise, literally every medical officer trying to certify that this equipment has reached. Right. And then we had to give it to.
One of the key challenges facing the country is health issues. HIV/AIDS continues to be a challenge that we're working to fight. Pratik, you have worked with the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare on fighting this cause. Communication is an essential tool to getting attention of your audience and getting them on board to the scheme and facing the challenges of any issue. So, in particular context of HIV in this project, what were the key communication tools that you employed to get your message across?
Yeah, so Pooja, you're taking me about 20 years back in my life, which is wonderful because it allows me to rejig my memory as well and try and see how things were done at that point of time. But a lot of the fundamentals remain the same. So behavior change communication is all about giving the audience what they want rather than what you want them to be. Because the messages have to come from themselves. They have to be contextual. They have to be relatable. Only then it kind of works. Those days were like the early days when HIV was just getting a sense of visibility. Topics like sex and sexual intercourse was a much bigger taboo then. Things have opened up right now, but I think at that point of time they were a much bigger taboo. We used to work with certain groups like commercial sex workers and homosexuals, men who have sex with men, as we used to call it. We still call them truck drivers and drug users and so on. and within that group, just to be accessing those groups and working with those groups was a very very big deal. And that is where those initial days on how HIV communication was done was very different from anything that was done in the past. But that was also the time when media was opening up. A lot of channels were coming up. A lot of satellite was booming, and mobiles were coming through. Of course, social media had not penetrated because internet was very costly, and none of the Facebooks and all were there. But then we had a very good mix of mass media, mid media, and television was rocking at that point of time. Really rocking. I mean, today, like the way OTT is, at that time it was television. So we did come up with very innovative campaigns, and we had a very strong team in the ministry that did some very bold conversations, because every topic was something that somebody or the other would raise a red flag on. इसके बारे में क्यों बात करें? Why are you talking about this? This is a taboo issue. So we had to kind of build momentum that this is something that needs attention. We have to talk about it, because if you have an ostrich approach, you're never going to win over this. So thankfully, the country is now much more ready. Of course, in the last 20 years, things have completely changed in terms of just acceptance of this whole notion around sex as well. We still have a long way to go. It's not to say that it's completely out there, but it is much better than what it used to be. But then all those experiences in terms of just following basic tenets of good behavior change communication processes have still got to be followed even today. Of course, with the increased nuance of reduced attention span and too much of diversion that young and old people are now subjected to. So that those are some things that you have to be cognizant as a modern day communicator versus something that was done 20 years back.
Okay. So, speaking specifically in terms of a shift in habits or a culture shift, are there any specific aspects of communication that one should focus on?
These days, I focus on a few other issues. So, one of them is menstrual hygiene. Another one is around vector-borne diseases, malaria, dengue, and so on. And HIV, TB continue to kind of be in the mix as well. So it's not like it has gone out of the mix completely. And then we still have issues around sexual reproductive health. So I'm just talking about the health issues here. Of course, communication can pick up any topic whatsoever. So maybe I could just pick up a few nuances around, say, menstrual hygiene, because I guess that's a topic which is very close to literally 50% of the world, and the other 50% of the world needs to be cognizant of. Because despite the modernization and liberalization and thinking, acceptance of sex as fairly normal and so on, menstruation is not something that people are comfortable with still. And I'm talking about, learned people here. Forget about the other section where it's a huge issue. And women have to go through a huge amount of discomfort without having the ability to either talk to people about it or be open about their own spouses. Forget about anybody else.
Right. So it's like a culture where you're not comfortable speaking about menstruation.
Yes. So, and then how do you build communication that one is empathizing with the situation that you're in? So thankfully the world is getting better, but I can tell you there's still a huge section of the population that still doesn't want to talk about it. There are a lot of myths and misconceptions around menstruation and how you manage it. You still do not have enough support coming in from boys and men. So even today, if by any chance a girl in a school, in a co-ed school, say for example, ends up with spotting, there are a lot of kids out there who would make fun rather than empathize. Nobody would appreciate that you're going through mood swings or cramps or whatever. So it's a whole piece that one has to look at. And in our communication, what we try and do is not just make it contextual, but make it empathetic as well. But I guess the key ingredients still remain, how do you make it fun? How do you not make it dull and boring and dreary? Okay. Because then you also tend to reject that communication. So, sensitive topic, empathetic treatment, but then keep the fun element, keep the, some of those nuances that we all know a good communication piece should have.
Right. all of that to bring awareness and build conversation on the topic to make it more mainstream in a way. Of course. Building more on your experience on with the United Nations, you've worked with the Office of Drugs and Crime Prevention, where you're working for prevention of drug abuse by the youth. Under this project, you worked with multiple organizations coming together in tandem, including the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, National AIDS Control Organization, state governments, the United Nations, and other organizations. So, in a project such as this, which is of such an immense scale, spanning multiple years, and with an immense outlay of monetary funds and so many organizations coming together, how does the coordination and syncing work? What are the key challenges and how do you overcome them?
Okay, so one of the challenges we have around just the issue of drugs in India, that it kind of does not fall into a single line ministry. So in fact, the biggest player around drugs is actually the Home Affairs Ministry. So you would have heard about the Narcotics Control Bureau, who are the ones who were raiding people and with this kind of getting into the limelight for right or wrong reasons. So that's the Ministry of Home Affairs thing, and opium cultivation is handled by them and so on. So Ministry of Health looks at the health side of it. Ministry of Social Justice Empowerment looks at the NGO side, drug rehabilitation side of it.
Okay.
And as in the United Nations, we were trying to steer all these diverse players together to look at this common thing, which is individual suffering from drug abuse. So if you look at the way laws in the country have been framed, and they still are,
right.
Somebody who's a drug abuser is treated as a criminal, or somebody who consumes drugs. I won't call it an abuser. And the medical side, the fact is that he or she is a helpless soul, dependent on it, and is not able to pick the habit, not because they enjoy it so much that they cannot do without it, but because that's how dependency works, that's how addiction works. You need it to be normal. You don't need it to remain on that high forever. So just that understanding compelled us to work with a whole range of stakeholders, from the police to the law enforcement to Home Affairs to, of course, the Health Ministry, the Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment, which was our counterpart ministry in this case, and come up with a whole range of programs that would look at this whole situation with empathy and actually support young people who are into drugs to find ways and means to actually come out of. And if you can actually be on that journey, how do you sustain that?
Right.
The other part of the journey was, trying to, do a larger prevention campaign. And I distinctly remember we had a wonderful slogan called "I Decide," which was, as individuals, you could take charge of your own decision whether to go into drugs or not. And with this campaign across the country, so schools was a very important part of this whole program, and I myself have gone to 50s of schools, if not hundreds, just going to give a small lecture on why is it not cool to do drugs. And every time you will be confronted with situations like this rock star, that singer, they do drugs, why can't? I mean, they're the cool guys and so on. So how do you break that notion, and how do you tell people that it is okay, you can be creative and you don't have to be high?
Right.
And there are enough examples on the other side as well. You don't have to go with them once. And things like, so kids would come with examples like, this guy's been drinking forever and, they do fine. And not many would be concerned about examples where somebody's, become a addict and their life has gone downhill. And the fact that you and I could not predict that, if he has as much alcohol as I have, whether I become an addict and he does not, and vice versa, nobody knows.
Right.
So, how do you, so there's this whole campaign that we did around, it is not cool to do drugs and you can decide. Because nobody really, the first time you have alcohol and it's all bitter and,
Yes.
I mean, it's not a sweet drink or whatever, it's not like.
It's peer pressure and.
Peer pressure and whatever, so, but somewhere you are the one giving in.
Yeah.
You are the one who's succumbing, and then you blame the system, then you blame your friends, and then you blame whoever. But the fact is that nobody was thrusting that bottle down your throat, shoving you against a wall. So you had the choice to say no. Even if this happened once, the next time you could say no, but you don't, because you yourself want it. So somewhere, so I mean, we used to have a lot of these, I would say, some scientific discussions as well as to what is addiction and why people get addicted and why it is important to build empathy towards people who are still addicted, and why the world has to see that differently.
Right. So that is one aspect of a lot of organizations coming together to address a cause. There's also the prevalence of multiple organizations addressing a similar cause. For instance, you have worked with Magic Bus that has been addressing education and livelihoods, as does Prayatna today. So, where would you put this overlap of multiple NGOs addressing similar cause, and a lot of times in the similar geographic area as well? So, do all the organizations bring in something different and unique? What is the requirement of so many players and actors in addressing same cause in the same areas?
So, I would look at it from a very different lens. Let's say we talk about education. Now, the biggest player into education is the government. So, state governments and central government put together, they actually run the education space. And then after that, you have private schools who are also there in a fairly large number. So, if you look at data, there depending on the location, there's a huge number of private sector players as well. So there are people doing education already. So, but this is like a formal space around education. So, what I mean, I was in Magic Bus about 6-7 years back now, and we were trying to introduce a whole bunch of new ideas around education, especially around life skills, trying to make education a little more fun, hence ensuring that people do not drop out of school. And then we would follow it up with a whole bunch of other inputs that will inspire kids to look forward to education. Because a lot of kids, especially if you go to rural settings and kids coming from a state of society where they're just in school because the parents would either have nothing better to do, or they do not have enough perspective of what lies ahead in the future.
Right.
So those are the spaces that NGOs come and fill, and that's what we were doing in Magic Bus there. I'm sure they're doing something else and even better today. In Prayatna, what we are doing is again filling in gaps in the education system rather than replacing. So we don't run schools. We do not. We are not running hostels or whatever. But we know that. So, for example, one of the projects we're doing right now is setting up smart classes in rural Bihar. Now, so we have schools that are very poor on infrastructure. One of the things that is a constant challenge is lack of teachers, and then lack of quality teachers. Now, here we have a situation where a simple smart television, 50-inch television now costs nothing, as low as 35 to 40,000, or even less if you buy them in bulk. And the software costs something like 15 to 20,000. So a teacher's job becomes immensely easy if he can teach whatever, geography, history, English, mathematics, science, whatever, in using videos, using these smart techniques, and things are on the screen, and he or she can see, the kids can see, and you can keep playing it back till you learn. So smart classes are brilliant, and it's a very simple tool that when you put it in a school, everybody realizes, the school principal, the teachers realize that this is enormous help. And that is the space we come in as an NGO. Not that the government is not doing it already, but these are some of the additional pieces we're bringing.
Right.
So we are here to fill gaps, not here to replace education systems. And otherwise, I would say that there's so many children in this country, and there's enough and more for so many players. So you can have many Prayatnas, many Magic Buses, and still there'll be more to do.
Okay. That's good to learn. We also know that you do a lot of projects in rural India. We would like to understand some of the key focus areas when planning such projects and some of the key challenges you face in execution of such projects?
So, in terms of projects in the rural areas, we it cuts across all our thematics. So, there are projects around education, there are projects around health, sustainable development, livelihood, and so on. So, because when we work with the poorest of the poor, the chances are that you'll end up either in a slum or a rural setting. So, by default, we're there. I guess, and we take pride in being very rural focused, rural centric. So let me maybe take an example of two things. One, maybe a sustainable development project, and maybe a livelihood project. So in case of a livelihood project, if I have to do something in the rural area, I have to be very specific to what is possible out there. I mean, there's no point teaching, say, IT literacy to a bunch of girls in a rural setting where there are no jobs and there's no possibility. So how do you understand the ecosystem in a manner where you are relevant to the folks there? And in doing so, you offer sustainable options and possibilities to them that they feel will help them do better, rather than you coming with your city hat and telling them that these are the things to do. So this is what you need to learn and this is what you need to do. So the crux of all this is participatory planning and listening to them.
Okay.
I can tell you they are extremely smart people. They may be where they are and not doing so economically well for a host of reasons. But they are smart people. They know what they want. If we talk to them, if we hear from them, a lot of solutions also come from them. But I guess we have to be listening more,
Right.
and that about solves all the problem.
The sustainability movement is gaining increasing momentum today. One of the key players that can contribute to sustainability is the rural section of the country. In this regard, we would like to ask you, what are the key aspects from which we can address the sustainability movement from the rural perspective in India today?
So, the bottom line around sustainability is how do you work to, take care of yourself in the present situation, present generation, but also leave enough behind for the future generation, so that it's not a situation where you exhaust everything and the future generations are left to fend for themselves and they don't have much to look at.
Sure.
And this situation is applicable across the geography without borders. So rural, urban, anyway, this is a situation that has to be addressed. Thankfully, there is enough attention now going in there. To my mind, a lot of attention is still urban, and again, rightly so. It's a matter of prioritization because the depletion there is far more. The devastation there is far more acute, and hence you have to be cognizant of that. But we've seen in the rural settings also things going really wrong. The first thing I've seen is, even in my lifetime, just simply water bodies vanishing big time. So whether the rivers, whether there are ponds or canals, or the whole water system is just evaporating, literally evaporating out there. So we are getting more and more worried about where is the water going to come from the future generation. The water table also is going down for a host of reasons. Of course, there is overexploitation and then over irrigation and so on. So that's one part of it, which is broadly under the water category. The second, thing that we see is that lack of green cover. For farm use or non-farm use or other uses. So stretches that were large forests, there were large green covers, and water and green cover are kind of related as well, as you can appreciate. It's vanishing, and that's something to really worry about. Coming to the livelihood itself, in most of rural India, we still have farming as the basic, vocation that you indulge in. But the rampant use of chemical fertilizers and everything is just ensuring that land is barely arable for the future generation. We are looking at over irrigation. We are looking at over fertilization. We are looking at soil toxicity going very high. The humus content, the organic content within the soil going very high. And again, these are not sustainable propositions. If the world has to be sustainable, we ideally used to have to leave the soil the way we inherited it, or we probably had it, say, 50 years back. The last 30, 40 years have been catastrophic, and now every farmer uses enormous amount of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and weedicides. And because there's not enough training that goes on there, the rampant usage will have a huge impact not just on the land but the overall flora, fauna, insect population, and so on.
And speaking of, you are working through Prayatna on actually encouraging sustainable farming practices. So, please tell us a little bit about your work here in terms of specifics. How do you go about bringing this change in rural farming practices?
That this is a real struggle because farmers are typically at the most farmers, marginal farmers are at the bottom of the pyramid, and they're working with very small land holdings, and they want to produce enough and have the quality of the produce which is good enough to be sold in a local market. Now, even today, if you put in chemical fertilizers, so like this is the season for say butter, peas. If you put in just organic manure, cow dung, and so on, the peas will not look as green,
right,
as compared to the chemical fertilizer. Now that basically means that if you take it to a mandi, you probably get a lesser rate. So the first step that we do is actually give farmers a long-term perspective and give them a sense that look, this chemical fertilizer thing will, not just you are spoiling the land today, you are also consuming in a manner, the poison in a certain way, and degrading it to a level where the amount that you put in, your input cost over a period of time is going to go higher and higher, and so eventually you will be at a loss, and probably your kids will have nothing to inherit.
right.
Now, this is almost like a behavior change campaign that you have to embark upon, and then government is putting in a lot of efforts to promote organic farming, but unfortunately they do not do enough to market it because. Organic farming also means that the product to begin with could be lesser in terms of produce per acreage, and nobody is giving you a premium for that product because there's no branding and marketing associated with it. So what we do in our programs is one, of course, try and inspire farmers to be a part of this larger movement where we are not just taking care of ourselves, our future, and the ecosystem around us, but then train them into doing a lot of stuff, which is including how do you produce manure, how do you vermicompost, non-chemical weedicide and pesticides and seed culture and so on. So these are techniques that can be taught to people. So using a range of products from cow dung to urine to neem patta to this kind of a cocktail that you create. It actually does not cost much. Mm-hmm. And if you can train the farmers and the farmers can collectively start using that, you can create large swaths of land which go into organic farming. Some of them are able to market it better and hence fetch a premium, and so you get to go to fancy stores and organic, this will cost a little more and so on. Now that is something that we want government to encourage and step forward. We also have the trouble of, if you do it in a small patch of land, you don't get it certified as having been produced in a space which is organic.
Right.
The certification process is a pain and not very farmer friendly. And it has to be, we're trying to request the government and get collectively groups of farmers so that large swaths of land can be certified as organic. Maybe then we can embark upon marketing campaigns that will maybe fetch them a slight premium that will allow them to, one, indulge in it. Otherwise, they go to the mandi and their produce is not shiny enough, and
right.
They come back disappointed, and the whole cycle disrupted.
Right, misshapen products, the aesthetic appeal of vegetables is also important today. So, ultimately, a lot of work is going in a lot of areas through your NGO. And given your amazing experience, we would just love for you to leave a parting message or some learning for our audience today.
All I can say is that there is just so much to be done out there. we are normally confined to our own spaces. We are normally looking at our own lives and just looking at our own happiness and pleasures or whatever. But I can assure you that if you can do anything that takes you beyond yourself, the happiness quotient is going to increase. Pick up a cause, go out there, support someone, help someone, help elderly person, help a dog, help whatever, get that in your mind. Believe me, today is a very secure generation in terms of having food in the stomach and the other essentials in life. But I see a lot of young people who are missing out on the happiness quotient. Step out and stop thinking about yourself. For a few moments of your life, think about somebody else, and you will be a happier and complete person.
That's a wonderful message, and I hope more youth listen to this and take action on it. It definitely fills you with immense sense of gratitude for all the blessings that you have in your life. And it was an amazing conversation. Thank you for joining us today, Pratik. We would like to thank our venue partners, Crystal Hughes Limited, and our decor partners, Harmony Overseas.